It began quietly, without warning, in a place that never seemed dangerous. A small town surrounded by fields and silent woods, where most people lived with doors unlocked and windows open in the summer. The kind of place where neighbors trusted one another, and where nothing ever seemed extraordinary. But hidden beneath the calm surface of that town, something darker had been stirring for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The story begins with a house at the edge of the woods. It wasn't abandoned, but people avoided it. The paint on the walls peeled in uneven streaks, the windows looked permanently dirty, and the air around it carried a heavy stillness. Children passing by would cross the street and whisper to each other about shadows they swore they saw moving behind the curtains. Adults dismissed it, though even they admitted feeling uneasy if they had to walk past after sunset. Inside lived a man named Haroon. He wasn't strange to look at, an ordinary middle-aged man who worked quietly, paid little attention to others, and kept to himself. He rarely spoke in town, never attended community gatherings, and his groceries were delivered so that he didn't have to leave the property. For years, people simply accepted him as another recluse. Yet, over time, odd things began to happen. Dogs refused to go near his house. Birds that landed on the roof would sometimes thrash violently before flying away. On certain nights, faint noises drifted from his basement, low groans, scraping sounds, and what some swore were muffled cries. Rumors spread, as they always do. Some believed he was sick and hiding it. Others thought he had secrets in that house, something that tied him to a history no one dared to ask about. It was only when one teenager, daring his friends, broke into Haroon's yard that the whispers grew louder. The boy returned pale, swearing he saw symbols carved into the wooden shed, burned so deeply into the wood that they seemed to pulse under the moonlight. His friends laughed nervously, but his fear was real. What no one knew was that Haroon had been keeping something in his basement. Not a person, not an animal, but an object that carried with it a weight older than the town itself. He had inherited it from his grandfather, who had died under strange circumstances, leaving him nothing but that cursed chest sealed with iron locks. The chest had always been in the family, passed down through generations, with a single warning: never open it, never touch it, never let it see the light. Haroon, like his father before him, obeyed the warning for years. But solitude corrodes the mind, and curiosity festers in silence. On the night of a heavy storm, as rain battered the house and thunder shook the ground, he went into the basement and unlocked the chest. What came out that night was not something alive, yet not something dead either. It was the presence, a weight that filled the corners of the room, a cold that made his breath visible in the darkness. From that night onward, the town changed. People began waking to knocking sounds outside their windows. Children woke screaming from nightmares of someone standing at the foot of their bed, watching them with eyes too dark to belong to any human. The woods grew silent, as if even the animals were fleeing. And Haroon himself began to change. His face grew hollow, his eyes sunken, and his voice trembled as though something spoke through him. Neighbors who passed him on rare occasions swore he whispered to himself, not in any language they understood, but in sounds that felt ancient and heavy. No one knew yet what he had unleashed. No one knew the true story of the chest, or why it had been locked for so many generations. They only knew that something unnatural had slipped free, and it would not be contained again. The change in the town was slow at first, subtle enough that no one wanted to believe it was connected, but unease spread like smoke through the air. People began to whisper that the nights felt longer, the silence heavier. Even when the streets were empty, there was a sense of being watched, as though something stood just beyond the edge of vision. It wasn't long before the first disappearance. A young woman named Miriam had been walking home from the late shift at the bakery. She lived only 2 streets away, a path she had walked countless times. That night, she never arrived. Her shoes were found in the middle of the road, one facing forward, the other twisted sideways, as though she had been pulled violently off her feet. The search went on for days, with dogs sniffing the woods and volunteers combing through every corner of the town, but no trace of her was ever found. Haroon did not join the search. His curtains remained closed, and faint light flickered in his basement windows even past midnight. Some people wondered if he even knew what was happening outside his house, but others had begun to look at him with suspicion. When a second disappearance followed, a teacher who had gone out to feed her cats and never returned, rumors thickened like rot. Children spoke of shadows at the edge of the woods, shapes that moved too quickly, too silently to belong to animals. Some described tall, thin figures with arms that seemed to stretch unnaturally, lingering near the old house where Haroon lived. No adult wanted to believe them, but none could dismiss the way their children woke trembling, unable to sleep, claiming that something had been whispering their names at night. But the truth lay deeper. After opening the chest, Haroon had not slept properly for weeks. The first night, he thought he dreamed the presence in his room. The second, he heard it breathing. By the third night, he was no longer sure if he was awake or trapped in something else entirely. The presence had attached itself to him, and though he locked the chest again, it made no difference. Whatever had been sealed inside had seeped out like smoke, filling the house, clinging to the walls, poisoning the air. Haroon tried to ignore it. He spoke to no one, avoided leaving the house, and kept the basement locked. But each day, the voices grew stronger. At first, they were faint, whispering from the corners, but soon they echoed clearly, calling his name with tones that shifted from pleading to mocking. He covered his ears, yet the sound vibrated inside his skull. At night, the presence took form, not in full flesh, but as a shadow that stretched unnaturally, sometimes at the foot of his bed, sometimes crouched on the ceiling. It wanted more than him. He knew that. Whatever he had unleashed was no longer content to remain in the house. It was hungry, stretching beyond the walls, into the town. The missing people, Haroon understood, were not accidents. The presence had found them, lured them, and taken them into a place no one else could see. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was utterly still, he heard faint cries beneath the floorboards. The town grew restless. People avoided the streets after dark, bolting doors and drawing curtains tight. The woods, once filled with the sound of crickets and rustling leaves, fell into an unnatural silence. Even the church bells, which had always rung faithfully every Sunday, began to sound hollow, as though their echoes were swallowed before reaching the air. One night, the mayor gathered a small group of men to confront Haroon. They knocked at his door, demanding he open it. No answer came. When one of them pressed his ear against the wood, he swore he heard chanting inside, voices overlapping in a language none of them understood. The men left shaken, unwilling to force their way in, but convinced something unholy lived within those walls. Still, no one dared to act. Fear paralyzed the town, and silence became their shield. But silence only fed the thing that Haroon had freed. Because in the shadows of his basement, the chest still pulsed faintly, as though something within it breathed, waiting for the moment it would fully awaken. Days turned into weeks, and the town was no longer the same. Even those who had ignored the warnings felt it, the weight of something unseen pressing at the edges of their lives. Shops that once opened late now shut early. Lights in homes flickered without reason. People spoke in whispers, their words strained and careful, as if speaking too loudly might call attention to what lurked nearby. Haroon's house remained untouched, though curiosity drew some of the braver or more foolish residents to its door. Those who approached felt a cold unlike any natural winter chill. The ground seemed to pulse beneath their feet, and the air smelled faintly of iron and decay. Peering through the windows revealed nothing but darkness, yet the feeling of being watched was undeniable.